There are two signal discoveries, and Röntgen's has to be the first. In 1895, he observed X-rays. And that is the world-shaking, epoch-making discovery.
Röntgen noticed that various minerals reacted to X-rays, and he then discovered that if you made a box, a light-shielding box, in which you put a mineral across here which became excited under X-rays, the healer could look into there and that would cancel out the light so he could see very clearly the image focused on this fluoroscope here. And he would scan up and down the patient and look at the body so that the X-ray would shine through the patient, and he supposedly could diagnose the patient by holding this into his hand. So everybody in the room got a lot of X-rays, particularly the physician got a lot of X-rays. We have a fair number of notices of doctors dying from long exposure to Röntgen rays.
What can we do next with, as they fondly called it, with the ray? Well, the ray could do many things, and they did it. You got an X-ray, you can see the bones through your hand. What else can you do with it? And what else they tried? Name me something they didn't try. You name the disease, and I'll cite you the paper in which they tried to treat it with X-rays.
There's a picture from a brochure and shows a woman who is sitting in front of this bare X-ray tube, focusing X-rays right on her face. And the claim was it would remove superfluous hair. It really did work. Women got an average of 20 treatments. A woman put an end to this. She was profoundly disfigured to the extent that she couldn't appear in public. She walked up during this introduction and showed the news media how deformed her face was from this terrible radiation damage she got from these X-ray rays. And that produced an end to the use of X-rays to remove superfluous hair.
Famed Madame Curie of France opens the way with experiments and discoveries of the hidden mysteries and marvels of rare element called radium.
Here is one of nature's real curiosities. Somehow a spring forced its way up through the trunk of this apple tree, forming a natural fountain for all to drink from. The unusual thing is that the water contains radium and is therefore very helpful to drink.
Why take an expensive trip to some famous health spring, spend all your money taking that train trip, when all you need to do is to buy one of these radioactive crocks and make your water just as good as it is from the health spa. You would fill it full of water, and the water would become radioactive, and to show that, I could put this detector in now and look at that gauge go almost all the way up to the top.
Here is a picture of my mother taken in 1925. This is before she had Madame Curie's famous radium water. My brother was born in 1927. My mother developed phlebitis. The hospital and doctors gave her Madame Curie's radium water. It cured the phlebitis. She was kept on the radium water until approximately 1942 or 1944. Not at the dose that she had in the hospital. Consequently, she became sterile. And in 1936, they were going to operate on her several days down the road, and this was for a tumor. Well, unfortunately, maybe it was fortune, maybe it wasn't, but there's the tumor that she had. I was born.
This was an effort to show that patients without radium didn't thrive very well, but if they had radium, as this plant supposedly showed, they thrived. And so what they did, they sold various pads of radium that patients would put around their neck, around their pelvis area, on their back, on their head for brain tumors and so forth. And supposedly, this great comfort and simplicity avoided any really unpleasant surgery.
And again, in 1949, my mother was taking some laundry, and she was squatting down like something like what I'm doing to put it into a drawer or cabinet or something, and her right leg went to femur and a patella. It broke in 23 places. She went into the hospital, and while she was in the hospital getting the tubes and the pins put in and plates and all that, they found out that she was radioactive. And they brought a Geiger counter in. They had it on the highest position in the room near her, and this Geiger counter pegged at the extreme right hand. My mother went through the suffering with this radioactivity until she finally died in 1966. The diagnosis was radium poisoning. The bones in her body had completely disintegrated.
Radithor is a little bottle of a half an ounce of water with some radium salts dissolved in it. A man in Pittsburgh who fashioned himself quite a playboy named Byers, he drank 1,400 bottles of this so-called male rejuvenating tonic, but he began developing medical problems. His upper and lower jaw fell off.
My problems are, I have very weak bones, which my mother had. I have bad eyesight, which my mother had, and I've also lost like all my teeth about 20 years ago, and that seemed to be the same problems that my mother developed. And I've had a mild heart attack, plus I have cancer, which is under control at this point. Now, my mother was never diagnosed with cancer. I got it. But the other problems are too similar to what she had over her period of life. I wonder what, if any of this radium could possibly be the cause of it, or it's just bad genetics.
The history of 100 years since Röntgen has buried so many people with radiation-induced disease. And I think it's going to be worse in the next 100 years unless we learn the lessons of this 100. Radiation produces cancers was discovered within 5 or 10 years of Röntgen's work in 1895. The next big thing, I would say, was the radium dial painters who ingested radium and got frightful doses to their bones. And the error was made in thinking that you had to have enormous doses or you couldn't get cancer.
All right, now right here where you see that brick building, the old dial pane, the luminous they call it, luminous dial, sat right here. And you could walk anywhere around that building and get a 500 count per minute reading.
All of them girls are dead from that old building. I sat in there for 31 and a half years.
I-18. I-18.
You could see them glowing from the radium.
And 43.
The argon came down and dug up a couple of those women out of the cemetery. They died of radium poisoning.
She probably had no idea why she was sick. And they dug her up and brought her to Argonne National Laboratory to check her.
You can see these thick plywood boxes I had to have made back at Argonne to meet the Department of Transportation safety regs for transportation of this material. And you can see the label here tells anyone who sees it, LSA is low specific activity. The young women who were employed to paint the watch dials licked their brushes and consequently ingested small quantities of paint, which of course over time proved to be quite toxic. Many of these young women who were dial painters used to use the product to make Halloween kinds of faces, etc., and then they'd turn the lights off and they used to have a gay old time of it. And of course, all the time, of course, that product was irradiating their skin surfaces as well as internal contamination from ingestion.
Let me see your wristwatch. You see, it works even on the very slight activity of your watch dial. And the bees showed nothing. So, whatever killed your bees, it certainly was not radioactivity.
The radium dial painter story told us how very drastic the effects were of alpha particles.
I wouldn't want to build a house out here.
It's just so effective in disrupting DNA molecules and chromosomes.
This is old radium left behind from when they tore down the radium dial building. It was our original high school here in town. If you can see the dial, normal background should be right over here within the first mark, which would be 25 to 50 normal background. And as you can see, we're well over the 500, and that's count per minute.
And if there was ever a description of something that would correspond to a bull rampaging through a china shop, that's what an alpha particle going through a cell nucleus is.
There's almost, yeah, there it is, 1,500. Over 1,700. There's 400 counts, and I'm about 4 feet off the ground.
You must understand what radiation is all about, you see. Light is radiation. This lamp that is lighting up this room is radiation. It's rather harmless radiation. But if you get even close to this light, you'll get blisters and you'll be unhappy. You can go to shorter wavelengths. You can have a quartz lamp that will certainly make you sunburned. You can go to even further, more powerful energy sources of X-rays that can go right through your body and show what's happening inside. Or you can go to still more powerful radiations that will break up the substances from which the human body is made. And finally, you can go to even higher energies in terms of their specific action. They'll break up the atoms, the nuclei. That's what radiation is all about, you see. And this is, and in an atom bomb, you have all these types of radiation.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Albert Einstein's theory of relativity is formula used in discovery of atomic energy.
This is a picture of me at the Geiger counter taken in 1941 at about the time of the discovery of plutonium. We found out that the plutonium, as we named the element, underwent fission with a cross-section. This made it immediately eligible to be the explosive ingredient for an atomic bomb. And that was the basis for the plutonium project of the Manhattan Project.
At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, mysterious work of Manhattan Project creeps tediously through months and months of research and experiment, trial and error, world's most guarded secret.
Once I discovered and isolated uranium-233 in my work with Glenn Seaborg, we wanted to know whether it would fission as does plutonium.
At Hanford, Washington, is produced one of the explosive materials used in the atomic bomb, plutonium.
I did feel very devoted to the idea that there was a horrendous enemy out there in the form of Germany and Japan. And there were a lot of people I knew that were going off to war and getting killed. And that was a big motivation, and it was intrinsically interesting.
We were running a race against an adversary that was a phantom, wasn't even there. The Germans apparently did not take seriously the possibility of producing a nuclear weapon.
And we worked around the clock and isolated not a half a milligram, but 1.2 milligrams of plutonium, which was a 20-fold increase in the world supply of plutonium. But that job, we got a good radiation dose. And people say, well, why aren't you dead? I'm one of the lucky survivors, and I have felt every decade from, say, age 30 on, I was damned lucky.
We realized when we started up this pile, they called reactors piles in those days, piles of graphite and piles of uranium slugs. When we started up under the athletic stands here at Chicago, well, we suddenly realized we had a serious health problem.
But suddenly, desert sands near Alamogordo, New Mexico, disappear beneath castles of clouds rising from this first atomic blast.
For better or worse, man had unleashed the frightful power of the atom. Pandora's box was opened.
Then it slowly grew on us, the enormous potential of this. But I don't ever remember just, sort of sitting down and saying, wow, look what we've done. Look what an impact this is going to have on the future of mankind.
Harry Truman sent a plane on a mission that would change the course of mankind's destiny. The bomber's target was the Japanese city of Hiroshima.
This is how nuclear bombs work. First place, you set up a blast wave that blows away most of the city. That leads to immediate death of many people. Next, you have the acute radiation, both nuclear and thermal, that burn people to death. And finally, you have the long-term effects of radiation.
I saw a little silver airplane in the sky. It was like a silver fish. And I thought to myself, only one plane can't do too much damage.
We're looking over the rooftops of the Radiation Effects Research Foundation. Used to be the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission. You can see the harbor of the city behind it. Over this way, we're looking toward the hypocenter. I'm essentially pointing straight at it now. And it is about 1,000 meters from here. And all of this was completely flattened at the time of the A-bomb explosion.
I got out onto the veranda and looked out over Hiroshima. What I saw was this fireball in the sky. It was a glowing circle of fire like a donut at first, the middle getting bigger and bigger, until the fire circle was like a big sun. And then it was a mushroom cloud.
After I heard this big sound, because of the darkness, I couldn't really see anything. Then I realized that there were no houses or landmarks left at all, and I wondered what on earth had happened. I heard my children crying out. My son's nose was all bent, and his ear had gone. His whole body was covered with a film of ashes, and he just didn't look like a human being. But we were just so glad to be together, and through the tears, we kept saying to each other, "We are alive, we are alive."
People's faces were swollen, like big watermelons. Their skin was completely black, just swollen eyes peering out. The nose disappeared, a mouth like this.
I had a terrible diarrhea. It was like melted chocolate. The children had the same problem, and they really wanted water. So we made our way to the river. I told them their father would be coming home soon to help us. So we started going back. On the way home, the children said they couldn't walk anymore. I told them we had to keep walking. After a while, the children stopped talking, and then they collapsed. That was when they died.
I was 6 kilometers away when the bomb was dropped. For 3 months, I worked with the sick and injured. I breathed in the radiation and drank the contaminated water. After 2 weeks, I felt very tired and I had a fever. Then I developed purple spots all over and had bleeding from my nose.
This is the only part that wasn't burned. I was wearing Japanese sandals. On my leg, there were maggots.
Truman was prevailed upon not only to drop the bomb on Hiroshima, but to test the plutonium weapon on Nagasaki, even after we had already tested it at Alamogordo. And I feel that we made a terrible mistake.
The price of peace was inestimable.
The price of the atomic bomb was $2,000 million. And just as Piccadilly Circus and Times Square shouted out its success, so did the bomb laboratories. The people who had built it in their secret hideaways in New Mexico and Tennessee celebrated victory.
After the crucial discovery of fission, it took about 5 years to make the bomb. Another 5 years, more or less, to build the reactor. More or less, it all happened at the same time. Since then, we have 50 years of technological development. And what we've done technologically is sort of following the initial steps. No new breakthroughs in terms of science have occurred during this whole period. But socially, we're still coping with the consequences of these discoveries.
I was ordered to take part in Operation Crossroads in the Pacific island of Bikini Atoll in 1946. None of us knew anything about radiation. When I say none of us, I'm talking about the enlisted men that were on the ship that I was on.
A few feared these tests. Some feared that they would annihilate all the fish for miles around, or even that they would start a chain reaction in the seawater which would kill all life on Earth.
We know what the bomb did in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We must know in times of peace what it will do to ships in time of war. We must find out whether the day of heavy warships and amphibious landings is now history.
We detonated a 24-kiloton bomb.
Gigantic naval vessels bob like tiny bottles on blasted and boiling seas. Mile-high cloud of deadly radioactive mist rolls over the target fleet. A tidal wave...
Immediately after that, within minutes, we started back into the lagoon. We knew there was a lot of radiation there because we had a monitor up in the front who was directing us to go to different directions as we worked our way through the target array. We were told that we were going to go there to take part in a very historical event that would change the Earth that we live in for a better, safer place to live. And after about 4 days, I was extremely ill to the point where I just didn't want to do anything except stay in my bunk and just be alone.
I don't believe there is a cure. I don't think so.
Plutonium can cure cancer.
Yes,
Yes, it can. Sure, it can. Yes, plutonium doesn't cure cancer, does it, Mr. Johnson?
Let's look in this box here.
To answer such a question, they need reliable information.
What I have here is a canister containing a plutonium-239 sample, which has a measurement of 1.6 nanocurie on it. This is a small stainless steel planchet that we have here as a plutonium standard of historical significance.
These were people that were very ill in hospitals at the time. They were in there assuming they were getting medical treatment, not being injected with a poison.
This particular sample, I believe, is from the actual solutions that were used in the plutonium injection cases.
As I understand it, there was a feeling that one wouldn't be responsible if one didn't have information about how plutonium would behave in humans in the event that there that a plutonium bomb would be used and some people would be injected with plutonium.
The individuals that were used in that study were all diagnosed as terminally ill patients. And that's all I can really tell you about the samples. It just turned out that in several of those cases, the diagnosis made at the time proved to be in error, and they lived much longer than had been anticipated.
Essentially, they were using these individuals as calibration devices. You put a certain amount of plutonium in the body, you see how it's excreted. Therefore, when a worker gets exposed, you can measure the plutonium in the urine and feces and then deduct how much plutonium is in this individual's body. Never mind that you can't get it out.
Here it is. Radioactive byproducts from uranium and plutonium have been used experimentally in the treatment of cancer, but with inconclusive results.
Well, these people were in the hospital. We had American judges in Germany judging war criminals over human experiments.
It was a matter of responsibility to learn something about the physiological location and effects of plutonium and methods of removing it from the body. That just seemed reasonable and almost imperative at that time. That's as I see it.
In 1945, the Atomic Club had only one member, the United States, who suspected that Britain had enough information to become the second member. Britain was the United States ally. There were no mutual fears. Russia was an ally, but there were fears.
The feeling that we were in a race with the Germans during World War II was then replaced by the feeling that we were, well, not the feeling, but replaced by the understanding that we were in a race with the Soviet Union.
The worry was a United States B-29 bomber which had returned from a scientific observation mission in the Far East in August 1949, carrying photographic plates. When the plates were developed, they showed large areas of fogging and other unusual tracks which could have been made by the testing of an atomic bomb. But the United States had not exploded an atomic bomb in 1949. At once, aircraft equipped with radiation-detecting devices were sent to investigate. The news was unmistakable. The radioactivity was a result of an atomic explosion somewhere in Soviet Asia. Russia had the atomic bomb.
If the main entrance of the shelter is blocked, you can use the underground exit, which leads directly onto the street.
Мы сейчас находимся в архиве.
We are now in one of our archives. This is a completely unique collection of documents, which cover a period of 40 years, and there are approximately 100,000 radiation cases, which have occurred here in the 1,000 Urals.
Но я вам должна сказать, что это не единственная наша комната архива.
But this is not the only room in our archive. Please follow me, and I'll show you other rooms where more documents are kept.
Документы. Часть документов хранится здесь, но в основном наша комната архива в отеле.
Now, this is where we keep the outpatients cards, collected, as I say, over a period of 40 years, and on the whole relating to people who lived along the river Techa.
Эти документы медицинские касаются людей, которые жили по реке Тече.
On the river Techa, there is a military complex called Chelyabinsk, which produced plutonium for bombs, and which let out radioactive waste, some of which was very highly radioactive. This waste went into the river over a period of many years without informing either the people who lived in the villages along the banks of the Techa or even the medical workers. So people were exposed to chronic radiation.
Единственное в мире.
Well, that's a terrible area, just as disastrous as the Chernobyl is, the Techa River. That has been due to the absolutely, I should say, inhuman mismanagement of the nuclear industry in that part of the world.
What happened?
Well, they disposed of their radiation residues by simply throwing it away into rivers, somehow getting it out of sight and out of